I'm Dr. Chris Masterjohn of chrismasterjohnphd.com, and you are listening to episode 61 of Mastering Nutrition, where we have the recording of the February 23rd, 2019 Ask Me Anything, where members of the CMJ Masterpass came into a live Zoom session to ask me questions, and I answered them.
This is Mastering Nutrition with Chris Masterjohn. Take control of your health, master the science, and apply it like a pro. Are you ready?
Welcome back, everybody. In this AMA, we talk about if my tryptophan is low and I'm on a low-carb diet, should I supplement 5-HTP or should I supplement with tryptophan? And in fact, we unravel this case and look at some other amino acids and organic acids for this person's particular case and conclude something completely different than either of those options. We have, should I be concerned if my HDL cholesterol is high, my LDL cholesterol is low when they're out of the normal range? We have a question about appetite. If my appetite is too low and I don't seem to eat enough food, and yet everything about my health and well-being is great, do I have a real problem to solve? We have, why do I use the Genova Ion Panel instead of the NutriEval in comprehensive nutritional screening? What are my thoughts on niacin supplementation? Is it nicotinamide riboside or is it nicotinamide mononucleotide? And should we supplement with methyl donors when taking either of those? What should people with glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency be doing, not just about glutathione, but about folate, about vitamin K, about fatty acids, neurotransmitters? So many things going wrong with the 8% of the global population who has glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency. So more than just they can't eat fava beans. Many things that are going wrong on a daily basis. And what would I do about all those things to optimize someone's health? Could choline citrate, CDP choline, or alpha GPC mitigate the risk of cognitive decline associated with using anticholinergic drugs? What are the pros and cons of using sulforophane, and does iodine matter? How do I get calcium on a low-carb, no-dairy diet? Should we supplement with trace minerals that are poorly studied like chromium, molybdenum, and boron? Should I manage my total cholesterol of 305 just for my doctor, or should I be doing it for my own sake? And if so, how should I do it? What should I do if my arachidonic acid is low, even though I already eat a lot of egg yolks? What can we do to boost antiviral activity? What food supplements and training programs are good to develop muscle mass? Are there any upcoming revisions to the next edition of Testing Nutritional Status, the ultimate cheat sheet, that I can let go a little early? When I eat more than 100 grams of protein, my urine stinks and I feel awful. What could be going wrong? We take a look at their blood results and see. What do I think of Jigsaw brand Alaskan cod liver oil? What do I think of their magnesium? Why might taurine at 10 grams a day make me feel better? What about the side effects of taking vitamin B6 like nightmares and tinnitus? Should people with a polymorphism in the glutathione S transferase enzyme not be taking vitamin E? For omega-6 and omega-3 fatty acids, is it better to use red blood cell fatty acids like Omega Quant offers instead of plasma fatty acids like Quest offers? I have high LDL. Do I need to know more about large fluffy particles versus small dense, or should I just act on it now? Why might my TSH be at the top of the normal range when my free T3 looks great? Cataracts. Is intermittent fasting and keto going in the right direction? What else should I be doing? What about tocotrienols to lower cholesterol? What gut experts would I recommend? What about sensitivity to MSG? Can B12 deficiency over years cause irreversible problems that manifest as burning sensations in the legs after physical activity and fatigue? And in another case, can serum B12 be up at the top of the reference range and yet still have signs of B12 deficiency? Is it B12 or is it something else? What about lab tests for carnitine? Can we absorb more than 1.5 grams of creatine at a time? My answers to these questions coming up shortly. If you are watching this on YouTube, the pinned comment has timestamps with clickable links to each question in this episode, so you can skip to specific questions if you'd like. If you're listening to this on one of the other platforms, just go into the show notes, where there aren't clickable links, but the timestamps are mapped out for you so you can skip to exactly where you want to go. If you would like to participate in the next AMA, sign up for the CMJ Masterpass at chrismasterjohnphd.com/masterpass/mastering nutrition. Using that URL or just clicking the link in the description of this episode will get you a lifetime discount of 10% off the program. You don't just get to participate in an AMA like this at least once a month, but you also get ad-free content and you get transcripts for these AMAs and for all my other audio video content. All right, without further ado, here's a word from my sponsors, and then we get into my answers in this AMA.
This episode is brought to you by Ample. Ample is incredible. It's a meal in a bottle that takes a total of 2 minutes to prepare, consume, and clean up. 2 minutes. I'm not kidding. Now, I know what you're thinking. Anything that quick just has to be made of synthetic ingredients that you'd have a hard time pronouncing and wouldn't want to put into your body. But it's not. Ample is made entirely from natural ingredients and designed to provide an optimal balance between protein, fat, and carbs, as well as all the vitamins and minerals that you'd need in a single meal. There's no question that it's always best to sit down and take your time eating a home-cooked meal from fresh ingredients. But let's face it, oftentimes we just don't have time for that. If you live a busy life like I do and your goal is to get things done, you need quality fuel that you can get into your system quickly. Here's a great example where Ample is perfect for me. When I shoot videos, it takes hours to set up and break down all of my equipment. So I try to get as many videos shot in a day as possible. This prevents wasting a lot of time on setup and helps me conserve big blocks of time outside of shooting videos to get into a flow state where I can research something to my heart's content and spend all the time I need thinking about it creatively and analytically. But if I spend hours dealing with recording equipment plus hours spent preparing food, eating it, and cleaning up, there's no time left over to actually shoot any videos. So on recording days, I use Ample to maximize efficiency and focus on getting things done. Ample comes in 3 versions: original, keto, and vegan. And each version comes in 2 portion sizes, 400 calorie and 600 calorie. The 600 calorie original version gives me 37 grams of protein from a mix of grass-fed whey and collagen, which promotes satiety and flips my brain on. Its fat comes from coconut oil and macadamia nut oil. I like these oils because they're low in polyunsaturated fatty acids, or PUFAs, oils that promote aging and are usually loaded into the processed foods that most people eat when they need something on the go. The coconut oil provides some medium-chain fats to keep my energy levels up, too. The carbs, the vitamins, and the minerals all come exclusively from food sources like sweet potatoes, bananas, cocoa powder, wheat and barley grass, and chlorella. It's full of natural prebiotic fibers and probiotics to promote a healthy microbiome, and the gentle sweetness comes from a mix of honey, monk fruit, and stevia. I just mix it with water, drink it, rinse out the bottle, and boom. 2 minutes in, and I'm fully fueled and ready to face the next phase of the day. I first came across Ample when I met its founder and CEO, Connor Young, at PaleoFX a few years ago. Connor inspired me with his vision for Ample, which I anticipate will be much more than a meal in a bottle in the near future. I've become an official advisor to Ample, and I'll be helping Ample design scientific research that will lead both to an ever-improving Ample and, I hope, meaningful contributions to our understanding of how to use nutrition to help people be healthier and happier and perform better at the challenges that they care most about. As a listener to the Mastering Nutrition podcast, I've also worked out a special deal for you. If you use the discount code CHRIS15, you'll get 15% off your first order of Ample. To get your discount, go to amplemeal.com. That's amplemeal.com, 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 and use the code CHRIS15 at checkout. This episode is brought to you by Ancestral Supplements. Traditional peoples, Native Americans, and early ancestral healers believed that eating the organs from a healthy animal would strengthen and support the health of the corresponding organ of the individual. For example, the traditional way of treating a person with a weak heart was to feed the person the heart of a healthy animal. Modern science makes sense of this. Heart is uniquely rich in coenzyme Q10, which supports heart health. The importance of eating organs, though, is much broader than simply matching the organ you eat to the organ you want to nourish. For example, natives of the Arctic had very limited access to plant foods and got their vitamin C from adrenal glands. And vitamin C is important to far more parts of your body than simply your adrenals. In his epic work, Nutrition and Physical Degeneration, Weston Price recorded a story of natives who cured blindness using eyeballs, which are very rich in vitamin A. But now that we understand vitamin A, we know that we can get even more vitamin A by eating liver, making liver good for your eyes. Our ancestors made liberal use of organ meats both to be economical and to utilize their healing and nourishing properties. Animals in the wild do the same. Weston Price had also recorded a story of how the zoos in his era were capturing lions, tigers, and leopards, oh my, only to watch them become infertile in captivity. Researchers then observed what the lions did when they killed zebras in the wild. What they did was they went straight for the organs and bone marrow, leaving the muscle meat behind for the birds. But even the birds took what they could of the organs and bone marrow. Price reported that once the zookeepers started feeding the animals organ meats, boom, their fertility returned. The problem I often encounter, though, is that many people just don't like eating organ meats. Let's face it, if you weren't raised on them, it can be very hard to acquire a taste for them. That is where Ancestral comes in. Ancestral Supplements has a nose-to-tail product line of grass-fed liver, organ meats, living collagen, bone marrow, and more, all in the convenience of a gelatin capsule. For more information or to buy any of their products, go to ancestralsupplements.com. Ancestral Supplements, putting back in what the modern world has left out.
All right, Doug asks, if my tryptophan is low and I'm on a low-carb diet, would you recommend 5-HTP supplements or tryptophan supplements or both? Well, if you're I don't know why your tryptophan is low. It could be that you are not eating enough protein, or it could be that you have a high utilization of the tryptophan. I would look in the test and see if the 5-hydroxyindole acetate is elevated, because if it is, then that would suggest high serotonin production, and that might explain the low tryptophan. Could be that your tryptophan, and at that point you might want to look into other explanations. So in this particular case, I believe we had talked about this before. In the last episode, we covered high estrogen levels might be one of those things, in which case the root cause is the high estrogen levels and you need to address it at that level. And so repleting the tryptophan maybe isn't necessarily the goal unless you have symptoms that are related to low tryptophan levels. If you're overproducing serotonin, if anything, you might have symptoms that are more related to high serotonin levels. You might not have any symptoms that are related to low melatonin levels, which is downstream from serotonin, in which case the main negative effect of depleting the tryptophan would probably be related to niacin, because tryptophan is used to synthesize niacin, in which case the goal would probably be best served by supplementing niacin instead of tryptophan. However, if you're trying to put on lean mass and it's not working, it could theoretically, conceivably be possible that serotonin overproduction would be depleting the tryptophan to the point where you didn't have enough tryptophan to put on the lean mass you want. I don't know how likely that is, but I would use these metrics of, what is the goal that you're not meeting? What are the symptoms that you're having to try to determine which one is more likely? So I think repleting the tryptophan only makes sense in those cases. Only makes sense if you are trying to put on lean mass and you're not. So you could try repleting the tryptophan and see if that helps. If it doesn't, there's no need to do it. If the tryptophan is being diverted into serotonin, that's why it's low. Again, judgeable by whether 5-hydroxyindole acetate is elevated. Then it makes no sense to put 5-HTP into the system, because your problem isn't that you have low serotonin. It's, if anything, it's that you have a high serotonin. So The only other explanation I would say is if you have a low protein intake, you might need to increase your protein intake. But if that were the case, you would probably see other amino acids more across the board that were depleted and not just tryptophan. All right, thanks for your question, Doug. Heather says, should I be concerned about high HDL cholesterol in the context of low normal total cholesterol? My total cholesterol is usually in the 160s, LDL mid 40s, HDL about 110, and triglycerides in the upper 30s to mid 40s. I'm not sure. I remember seeing an argument somewhere that could be a result of inflammation. If that were the case, I think you would probably have other signs. For example, high sensitivity C-reactive protein should be elevated if that's the case. Some people just generally run that high, and I'm not sure. In this case, if your LDL runs so low, and actually that's very, very low, most probably you have maybe a genetic polymorphism in cholesterol ester transfer protein, CETP, which is responsible for transferring cholesterol between the lipoproteins. So if that's the case, then there's probably no negative consequence related to the high HDL and probably nothing you should do to change it. I do think that, let's see, so low CETP activity would raise HDL cholesterol. It might do so as a side effect. It might have a negative effect on your vitamin E transport. And it might be the case, and this really has nothing to do with treating the high HDL in any way. It might be the case that you would have positive responses to vitamin E supplementation, even if your vitamin E blood levels don't suggest that. This is pretty speculative, but I would say if you're not supplementing with vitamin E, you might want to try a small dose like 20 IU of alpha tocopherol. Gerotocozorb would be a good candidate. And there are some liquid vitamin E supplements somewhere on the internet where you could probably take a 1 drop or something like that to get 20 IU. You might want to try it just to see if you get any tangible benefits from it. But no, I wouldn't be concerned specifically about the HDL being that high. Thanks, Heather, for your question. Tiana Talent says, I have a client who has had a low appetite, self-described, all her life. She thinks that it's gotten even lower in the last year and a half. The only thing that changed around that time was moving. She said that eating on RP's most restrictive cut template felt, what's RP? Is that repeat or, probably Renaissance periodization. Folks, please try not to use abbreviations in your questions because we're crossing too many fields here where one abbreviation can be the exact, it can mean totally different things. Tiana's chatting. Yes, Renaissance periodization. Okay, this is making more sense to me. Okay, so Renaissance periodization is they make templates for people who are power athletes or physique athletes, and their most restrictive cut template. Okay, so suddenly this is all clicking. This is a template for someone to lean out and in terms of physique. So this client had a low appetite all her life. She moved a year and a half ago. And then she says that the Renaissance periodization most restrictive cut template found like an appropriate amount of food for her. She doesn't really have any other symptoms. She's having daily bowel movements. Energy's pretty good, but she's not sure why she's never hungry. She just had some general labs pulled last week, but we don't have the results yet. What are some factors I should consider in someone like this who has a low appetite? I'm not sure I'm the best person to answer this. So if she doesn't have any other symptoms, she is having daily movements and her energy is pretty good, it sounds like that is a good amount of food for her. So it's important to eat enough food because you have to get enough total food, calories, you have to get enough protein, and you have to get enough micronutrients, right? And if you're deliberately eating less food, or if you have no drive to eat, you might not get enough micronutrients in. And so it might be especially important for you to focus on a nutrient-dense diet. But if there's literally nothing wrong with her across the board on any symptoms of nutrient deficiencies or any symptoms of low metabolic rate, low mood, low energy, which it sounds like there's no problem at all, then I don't know what explains the low appetite, but particularly if she's happy, right? I mean, you said her energy is good. Is her mood good? Because sometimes this is a psychological thing. If you're depressed or if you have a low hedonic response, meaning you just don't get pleasure out of anything, that could be an underlying, I say psychological, that doesn't mean it's all in your head. But it's all in your brain. That could be an issue for many people, but it doesn't sound like she has a problem. So maybe her microbiome, totally. She's just, so Tiana adds totally, ! She's just kind of weirded out about not really ever being hungry. I don't know. I just think she's eating enough food, and maybe her microbiome is amazing at extracting every last calorie. Maybe she's doesn't have a completely realistic sense of how much food she should eat or what. But if there's no problem, there's no problem as far as I can tell. If you want to be extra careful, run some comprehensive nutrient screenings or something like that to just rule out that there's not some problem you can't figure out what it is. But hey, I just don't think it sounds on the surface, based on what you've described so far, that there is just no problem here. Thank you, Tiana, for your question. Okay, Philippa says, at the last AMA, you mentioned that people with G6PD deficiency would have trouble recycling other things such as folate and vitamin K. Could you expand on these problems and how to manage them? Also, do you recommend glutathione supplementation for those with a G6PD deficiency? Sure, I can expand a little bit. At some point, we hit up against a wall here because there's certain things that you just can't do to fix the root cause. But basically, to expand means to go into the biochemistry. So G6PD, glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency, is an inborn error of metabolism. It's the most common one in the world. About 8% globally have some impairment in this enzyme. And the reason that it's important is because glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase is the enzyme that allows you to make NADPH. And NADPH is a specific derivative of niacin that's involved in antioxidant defense, detoxification, synthesis of neurotransmitters, synthesis of nucleotides, which are needed for cell division because they're parts of DNA, needed to produce every protein in your body that plays a role in everything in your body because they're needed to produce RNA. Affects every aspect of energy metabolism because every energy carrier in your body has nucleotides in them. Synthesis of cholesterol, synthesis of fatty acids, and recycling of vitamin K, folate, and glutathione. So you basically have your NADPH production has taken a hit, and your body is going to engage in many compensations to try to make up for that. And one of the problems, and the problem that is most well studied because it's the problem that is most obviously manifest in someone with glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency, is this is also called favism because there's a toxin in fava beans that most people can tolerate, but someone with with an impairment in this enzyme, when they eat the fava beans, they can't tolerate that toxin because they don't have the glutathione needed, or they don't have enough glutathione to protect the membranes in their red blood cells from being destroyed, basically. And so they're vulnerable to hemolysis, which is when the red blood cells fall apart. And so if one of the problems with hemolysis is that you essentially become anemic. We usually think of anemia as iron deficiency, where you have fewer red blood cells, or they have less hemoglobin, they're less able to carry oxygen. Well, if you're just destroying your red blood cells, you're going to have very similar problems coming out of that. So the most obvious and manifest problem, and therefore the most studied one, focuses on glutathione, because glutathione is the specific thing that can't be recycled in the red blood cells that is specifically causing the vulnerability to hemolysis. And what I said in the last episode was glutathione reductase is the enzyme that uses NADPH, the thing that you can't make here. Glutathione reductase uses that energy to recycle glutathione. And it does so using riboflavin or vitamin B2 as an intermediate. So one of the adaptations that someone with this impairment has to try to protect themselves is for the glutathione reductase enzyme to hog all the riboflavin, so that it says, look, I don't have enough of the raw material I need to make this happen. So I'm just going to make myself get way, 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 way better at using what I do have. And so that's an adaptation to compensate for not being able to make NADPH, is just to get way better at using NADPH to recycle glutathione. Now, obviously, it's not good enough when the system is taxed. Otherwise, you wouldn't get hemolysis from, for example, eating fava beans. But it is a partial compensation. And so if you can minimize the stresses on your body, then your ability to partially compensate is very good. The thing is, when you ask, what else can I do about this? The thing is, we're talking here about your neurotransmitters, your cholesterol, your fatty acids, the entirety of your system of energy metabolism, your glutathione, your detoxification, your antioxidant defense, your folate, your vitamin K. So there's no way you can possibly come up with the hundreds of different specific things to fix all those secondary problems. And so supplementing glutathione is, it's not necessarily a bad idea. You just have to be conscious of, at a certain point, there's you just can't solve every one of the dozens of problems that are happening. So yeah, I think that you should measure your glutathione status. Probably the best test available, not because it's the best we could have available, but because there's nothing better right now, is LabCorp's test for glutathione. If that looks low, then I would supplement with glutathione to try to bring that up to normal. I would do that. For the folate recycling and the vitamin K recycling, for folate, you have to consider this basically as if you had a really bad MTHFR polymorphism. The reason is that in this case, what's happening is G6PD is needed to make the NADPH that MTHFR uses, again, with the help of riboflavin, to make the methyl group on methylfolate. You can take some methylfolate, but as I've made the point in my MTHFR protocol at chrismasterjohnphd.com/methylation, as I've made the point there, you'd have to take 18,000 times the RDA to compensate for the 18,000 times a day that you add a methyl group to the folate molecule using that enzyme, using the NADPH that you're less good at making because of this impairment. So you can't, it's not safe to take anywhere near that folate. I don't know what happens when you do, but I wouldn't do that. It's not safe and it makes no sense. So what I would do is I would just very strictly follow the MTHFR protocol that I have at chrismasterjohnphd.com/methylation, and that involves doubling your choline intake because you don't need NADPH to use choline to support methylation. So just as if your MTHFR didn't work because of genetics in that enzyme, what you would do is you double your choline utilization for methylation because you're not good at using folate. Well, presumably that's also what happens here. It also involves compensating for low methylfolate effects that deplete glycine. And so you put some glycine into the system, and it also involves creatine synthesis to lower your methylation demands. I would do that. On recycling vitamin K, it probably just means that you need a high amount of vitamin K in your diet. And I think it's probably similar as if you had a bad VCOR polymorphism. VCOR is the enzyme that recycles vitamin K using NADPH that you got from this pathway that's not working right when you have G6PD deficiency. But I have a bad VCOR enzyme, and so I don't recycle vitamin K well. I think that's why I get mad tooth decay when my diet is not that good, right? So when I was vegan, I had over 15 cavities and I needed 2 root canals. I found out about all of them in one sitting at the dentist. And I think part of that is that I didn't have vitamin K2 in my diet, and vitamin K2 protects against tooth decay, protects against cardiovascular calcification. And because my vitamin K recycling enzyme wasn't very good, I needed way higher vitamin K. Well, if you have G6PD deficiency, your vitamin K recycling enzyme genetically might be fine, but you can't make the NADPH it needs. And so it's as if it wasn't good at recycling it. In that case, there's no alternative like there is with methylfolate. There's nothing you can do except add more K2 into the system. My tooth decay went away when I just started hardcore eating Weston Price. And I'm not talking about, I took the most palatable things about Weston Price, like the raw milk and the bone broth, and ignored the organ meats. I'm talking hardcore, I'm talking eating a pound of bison liver a week for a very long time. Just every single thing that Weston Price said, just tripling down on it. My tooth decay went away. And so, I don't know exactly what the dose is, but maybe you would want to put in 1 milligram or 2 or 3 or 4 of MK4. But you have to test this against symptoms basically, because there's no good test of vitamin K status. In terms of all this stuff that you are not good at synthesizing, because remember NADPH from the pathway that uses G6PD, which is the one that's impaired here, is responsible for synthesizing cholesterol, fatty acids, nucleotides, neurotransmitters. I think the only thing that you can do for that is to try to eat a lot of these things preformed. Now, I'm not saying eat dopamine, a neurotransmitter, but I think what you can do is probably you want to eat a diet that is high in animal foods, because animal foods have a lot more of these things preformed in them. And animal foods have cholesterol, for example, that plant foods don't have, but also just the nucleotides and all that kind of stuff. You probably want to eat a diet that is fairly low in fat and fairly low in starch. And what I mean by that is, even though I said rich in animal foods, all that preformed stuff, not much of it is in the fat. It's really in the flesh, for example. And when you're looking at plants, you're basically going after all the stuff that's in the cells, right? So if you look at plants, some plants don't store a lot of energy. The low-calorie plants are mostly cells. And so it's mostly all that preformed stuff that you're not as good at making in that plant. Whereas if you have a potato, that potato's got cells in it, but it also has a ton of extra storage starch that it's put into it. Same thing with the fat. Adipose tissue is your extra storage. And so you have like one adipose cell that's got one giant lipid droplet in it So when you're looking at fatty tissues, the ratios of the all the cellular meat, so to speak, to the extra energy are fairly low. But you don't want to go extremely low fat because you're not as good at synthesizing fat. How much fat would you synthesize if, actually, let me take that back. It's not that important to eat much fat because even when you're healthy, you only synthesize about 1 to 2 grams per day of fat, except for a woman in her, I believe it's the luteal phase of the menstrual cycle, will make up to 10 grams of fat per day. But who eats less than 10 grams of fat per day? No one. And I think if you eat an animal diet fairly rich in animal foods, you're going to get a lot of the specific fatty acids that you can't make. In other words, a high-fat diet is mostly giving you just a bunch of fat that you could have made yourself. But if you eat organ meats and you eat different types of meats and you diversify across animal foods, you're getting a lot of fatty acids that maybe are in small amounts but are really important. So, for example, arachidonic acid is found in milligram amounts in foods. In the foods that are really rich in it, liver and egg yolks, you're getting a few hundred milligrams of arachidonic acid. It's way more important. If you can't synthesize fatty acids, it's not that important for you to get a high volume of fat. It is important for you to get those specific fatty acids, such as arachidonic acid, in small amounts by eating liver and egg yolks. So I think I went into probably more depth than maybe you were looking for, but I hope that answers your question, Philippa. Thank you for your question. Pam Schoenfeld says, why Ion instead of NutriEval by Genova? So look, Genova owns, I forget who used to make it. Genova makes the Ion panel and they make the NutriEval, and they are close to identical, very overlapping. You would wonder why do they make both? And it's because they bought out the NutriEval test from the people that made it before. And so it's like almost not different. But when I was testing nutritional status, the ultimate cheat sheet, I had my assistant make a spreadsheet of all the markers that I wanted to look for nutritional status testing. And the Genova Ion panel, specifically the one that's plus 40 amino acids, not the one that's plus 20 amino acids, had a few markers that the NutriEval didn't have. Is the NutriEval good? Yeah, I mean, like you're missing a couple things. I don't remember off the top of my head what they are. They're mostly things that you could make up otherwise. So I think homocysteine, for example, is one of them, but it's a small difference. Okay, Heather Chandler says, could choline citrate, CDB choline, or alpha GPC mitigate the risk of cognitive decline associated with anticholinergic use? Well, I'm not sure that my knowledge is qualified to answer this right now because I'm not really, off the top of my head, I'm not too familiar with why people use anticholinergics. But cognitive decline is going to happen because of low acetylcholine levels. And the purpose of an anticholinergic, I believe, would be to lower the acetylcholine levels. So you're probably interfering with the function of the drug if you are deliberately boosting up your acetylcholine levels. With that said, yeah, I mean, with that said, the cognitive decline associated with their use is almost certainly because of low acetylcholine levels, and the alpha GPC is the only one out of those that would be really good at boosting acetylcholine levels. But there's probably a fundamental conflict between trying to boost your acetylcholine levels and taking an anticholinergic drug. That's all I can say about that right now. Thank you, Heather. Anonymous says, do you have any recommendations on how to get enough calcium on a low-carb, no-dairy diet? I've read that vegetables provide calcium, but bioavailability is poor. It really the bioavailability of calcium from different vegetables is highly dependent on the specific vegetables. So cruciferous vegetables have very good bioavailability. It's better than from milk. And spinach has like close to zero bioavailability. It's terrible and you shouldn't even count it. Nuts and seeds have about 20% of the calcium being absorbed. They're, if you compare that to milk, milk is probably going to be like 30 or 40%. Cruciferous vegetables are going to be like 50 or 55%. So, the problem isn't really the bioavailability if you select your foods properly. So if you eat a lot of cruciferous vegetables, and if you eat some of the high calcium nuts and seeds, in particular, sesame seeds are pretty decent. The hulls of sesame seeds are where most of the calcium are, though, and most people don't eat the hulls. But the real problem is the volume. So if you look at broccoli or kale and you look at how much volume of those foods do you need to eat in order to get 1,000 to 1,500 milligrams of calcium a day, which is the target, it's a ridiculously high volume. And I'm a bit skeptical that you want to eat more than, say, 200 or 300 grams measured cooked of those foods a day, because they're increasing your iodine requirement. At some point, they become a liability for your thyroid gland. And I think it's just best to eat 2 or 3 servings of those cruciferous vegetables a day. And that's basically maxing out the calcium that you can get from them. And you're just not going to get anywhere near the 1,000 to 1,500 milligram target. So bones. What, like a low carb, no dairy diet, what traditional diet is that emulating? It's emulating the traditional diets of the Arctic, where plant foods were very limited, where low carb was the norm. And how did they get their calcium? They crushed up fish bones, and they freeze-dried fish bones, they pulverized them, and they ate the bone powder. So bone meal is a traditional food, and you can consider it a supplement. But if you're going to consider it a supplement, then the answer is take a calcium supplement. Or if you're going to consider bone meal a food, bone meal was I believe the historic source of calcium in traditional diets that were low carb. Lawrence says, with a cyclone sitting near our coast, extremely high humidity has exacerbated my benign prostatic hyperplasia problem. Now I add 12 ounces of black coffee to my morning fast. You're making me want to take a sip of mine. Now I add 12 ounces black coffee to my morning fast. I started skipping breakfast recently to combat persisting high serum LDL. Fasting LDL-C is high as 305 milligrams per deciliter in recent years. Well, we're going to have to come back to that. My theory is that skipping breakfast would help towards losing weight. It could if it leads to a sustainable caloric deficit, which is how everyone loses weight. It's one tool, but you have to test it. I think adding coffee consumption during the fast not only helps suppressing inflammation, but also stimulates LDL-C production, or is it just free fatty acids? I believe this may reduce the serum LDL-C level by the time I go for another fasting blood lipid test. I want to improve my lipid profile just to please my doctor. You should want to improve your lipid profile for a lot more than to please your doctor. 305 milligrams per deciliter is, look, if you want to, let's revisit this from a cholesterol skeptic point of view. There was a graph let me see if I can pull this up on the screen here. If I can do it quickly, I'm going to do it. Okay, I cannot do it quickly. All right. So if let me reference one of the early cholesterol skeptics, Upi Ravenskov. He wrote a book called The Cholesterol Myths. And in that book, he shows a graph from the Framingham study where he's making the point that most people who have heart disease are all they're all overlapping he maps out the people who have heart disease and the people who don't. And so this is going to appear, I'm going to try to do this backwards so it looks normal to you in the video. The people without heart disease go up in a curve like this. And then the people who have heart disease go up in a curve like this, and it's just slightly shifted over. And he makes the main point that in the vast majority of people there have overlapping cholesterol levels. And so in fact, most people with heart disease just have normal-ish cholesterol levels and that are not that different from people who don't have heart disease. But if you look at that graph, one thing that you see is that the people with heart disease have this little tail that goes over, it's like a little tiny lump that goes over way up on the high end of the cholesterol amount as you go from left to right. And what that little hump is that everyone who had total cholesterol over a certain point, cutoff was around 300, had heart disease, and no one who didn't have heart disease had cholesterol that high. And similarly, there were on the other side, there were there was also a little hump on the other side where everyone below a certain cholesterol level didn't have heart disease. So if you're the only way you can possibly have fasting cholesterol that's over 300 milligrams per deciliter is to have a familial hyperlipidemia, such as familial hypercholesterolemia, or to have a very significant thyroid disorder. And, he clarifies, my apology, total cholesterol is 305, LDL is 205. I did not, fine, it literally makes no difference. The only way you can have a total cholesterol, and in fact, that's what I was saying before, the total cholesterol over 300 that's somewhere around the cutoff where everyone above that had heart disease. So look, the only way to have a total cholesterol of 300 or more in most cases is to either have a thyroid disorder or to have a familial hyperlipidemia when we're talking about fasting levels here. So you should want to manage your blood lipids for your own sake, because people with familial hypercholesterolemia have a dramatically increased risk of having heart disease decades earlier than it becomes normal for the general population. And so I'm not saying it's 100% that if you have a cholesterol of 300, you have heart disease, but you are way disproportionate in risk for that reason. So you definitely want to address this, not to please your doctor, but for the sake of your health. Okay, going back to the question. I also added plain yogurt and ginger to my diet to alleviate my prostatitis situation, which appears to be worsening chronic inflammation. Is there anything else nutrition-wise I should pay attention for the time being? Okay, so I can't speak to the relationship between humidity and benign prostatic hyperplasia because I don't know enough about prostate health in general, but including benign prostatic hyperplasia, to even know why the humidity affects it or what to do about it. But I can definitely speak to the blood lipids. So, okay, we're talking about coffee consumption, intermittent fasting, and total cholesterol being over 305. So I don't know. I mean, okay, let's take these things one thing at a time. So intermittent fasting can help you lose weight. Yeah, it can. Not particularly any better or worse than any other thing that results in a sustainable caloric deficit. So if intermittent fasting is a useful way for you to be able to sustain a caloric deficit that helps you do it in a way that's more sustainable or easier to accomplish than any other way, then I think that it should be fine to do that. I think that's a fine way to do it. but don't be fooled into thinking that intermittent fasting has any particularly special value to allowing you to lose weight. I think that if you have weight to lose, that losing weight should be one of the first things that you do to normalize your blood lipids and your inflammation. And so if you have weight to lose, I would make that your overwhelmingly single project for now. And then when you get to your optimal weight, I would start chipping away at some of these other issues. Being overweight causes inflammation. Inflammation causes your blood lipids to go up. Inflammation, I'm sure, probably contributes to the prostate issue as well. So if you can reduce the inflammation by reducing overweight, then I think that should be the number one thing that you do. Being overweight also contributes to elevated free fatty acids, and elevated free fatty acids do raise your blood lipids. That's, in fact, the entire rationale of using high-dose niacin to lower LDL-C is by suppressing free fatty acid release. So losing weight, becoming insulin sensitive, and when you lose weight, once you become insulin sensitive, working carbohydrate into your diet, all of those things will help target the blood lipids on that end. In terms of other things that you can do in this situation, I think addressing any inflammation in your gut. So you might have microbiome issues, working with someone who specializes in the gut to assess and address any gut issues. If you can't find someone, or while you're waiting to find someone, simply consuming a lot of vegetables, as long as your gut tolerates them and you don't get GI symptoms. With that proviso, working more high fiber vegetables into your diet and diversifying across the different plant fibers is a great way to nourish your microbiome, reduce inflammation that comes from the intestines that would negatively affect your blood lipids. But I do think that you need to look at those, and I'll put a link in the show notes. Check out the podcast that I did on dietary management of familial hypercholesterolemia. If these things that we just talked about aren't enough to get the blood lipids into the normal range, then I think you want to experiment with the ideas that I laid out in dietary management of familial hypercholesterolemia, which in the context of achieving ideal weight and insulin sensitivity would involve eating more carbohydrate and a low-fat diet, but selecting those foods to maintain nutrient density. And you could add something like psyllium husk fiber, which might be both good for your gut and the inflammation coming from your gut, and will also help reduce your cholesterol by making bile acids go into your feces and making your liver draw out cholesterol from the blood. If those natural things don't get your blood lipids into the normal range, then I think that you should consider being open to pharmacological methods, because I genuinely believe, look, I've gone through all the cholesterol skeptic literature, and I think, I'm against demonizing cholesterol. I do not believe that high cholesterol is the cause of heart disease. But if your lipids are that high, it's overwhelmingly because you are not clearing them from the blood, and not clearing them from the blood is the single most important risk factor for them oxidizing, and them oxidizing does cause heart disease. So I really do think that try all the natural things first, but if they don't work, be open to the pharmacological methods. I mean, this might be a case for statins. So, all right, thank you, Lawrence. Ed Shapiro is raising his hand. Boy. Ed, would you like to come on the screen?
Sure.
All right. I believe that if you start talking, we should see you. If you're, yeah, there you are.
Hey,
Hi.
how are you, Chris?
Good.
Good. So, quick question. So, I've been training for a long cycling race that's coming up in a couple months.
Okay.
And say it's going to be about 7 hours. And so, prior to the training or my days when I'm not training, I'm fairly ketogenic, I guess, in my eating approach. But I found that when I have high intensity workouts, that doesn't cut it. So I've added back in some more carbs. My question to you is, I've read a lot of literature about whether, maltodextrin, sucrose, fructose, and sucrose together, one of them is a better combination than the other. And my question to you is, is there one type of sugar that is better at getting through the gut than any other type of sugar?
Is this in the context of during your workout or after your workout or before your workout?
Definitely during the workout. So I'm trying to do, of course, is mimic as best as I can what I'm going to do during race day.
Yeah.
Without any surprises on race day. And so I want to train that way and see, what best works for me. But every company, of course, their literature says that their product is, of course, the best.
Yeah. I unfortunately, I just have not done research into this in the context of while you're exercising. It just has not ever made it up to the top of my list of things to research. It's a great question. My suspicion is that you're probably going to want some fructose in there, but not a tremendous amount, because you can surpass your gut's absorption limit. But yeah, what are the different options that you have?
There's some that have super starch, which is its own thing, which I've read about, which supposedly has the highest osmolality, they say, so you can get more nutrients through the gut. You can have a higher concentration getting through the gut. Sucrose is supposed to be great, but it's super low osmolality, so you can't get more than, say, 4% through. And then, so a lot of companies will do a combination of sucrose, maltodextrin, dextrose, fructose. They'll just mix it all up.
Do they put salt in?
Some of them have an electrolyte base as part of it. I'm in the territory of totally guessing here. But I would think that the electrolyte base would be important because glucose absorption in the gut is salt dependent. Got it.
But I wish I could offer you a better question, but it looks like that'll be a topic that I'll have to research more in the future.
Okay.
If you have some papers to look at or some products to link to, then maybe another time, send me them and I'll take a look at them when I can.
All good. Appreciate it.
Yep. Thanks, Ed. Okay. Anita says, Tiana adds, based on endurance racing experience, I'd check out Tailwind. Okay, I don't know if that helps you, Ed, but if you haven't checked out Tailwind, check out Tailwind. Thank you, Tiana. Anita Morgan says, what food supplements are good for developing muscle mass? Well, foods. So overwhelmingly, muscle mass is work out enough, eat enough protein, eat enough calories. So working out enough means 10 to 20. Probably for most people, what's sustainable is trying to hit 10 sets per muscle group per week. If you're really devoted to it, maybe going up to 20 is where you might get maximal advantage. And when we're talking about sets, we're talking about going up within 80% of failure. So, if you're doing a set that's 8 reps and you could have done 20, then that doesn't count. But if you're doing a set that's 8 reps and you would have failed at 10, then that does count. Ideally, you would mix them up in how in like 5 rep range, 10 rep range, 15 rep range, maybe split them equally across those ranges. But again, doing 5 reps when you could have done 6 is okay, but doing 5 when you could have done 15 is not. I think if you get that in, that's a huge thing right there. Then protein, you probably want to be up around 1 gram per pound of body weight, or per pound of target body weight, whatever you're looking, whatever your goal is to gain, set it that way. And then calories, you do need a caloric excess, but you don't want to get fat. So what I would recommend is to titrate the calories up. If you know where your weight's stable, add 100 calories a day and then track your progress. If you are gaining waist circumference, I know like this is a little bit harder when you're a woman because you're going to have more fluctuations in water weight and stuff. But I guess in terms of simple things to do to track your progress, waist circumference is valuable and looking in the mirror is valuable. In terms of better things, then if you can get an actual bod pod or DEXA scan, then that would give you more reliable information. There's a device called Sculpt where you can take, it's bioimpedance, I believe, but it's taking it at many different points where you take so much data that it actually becomes pretty accurate, but it's very time consuming. So anyway, take your choice of what you're going to use to track your progress. And if you're not gaining any fat, you can very slowly add your total calories. If you are gaining fat, you need to cut back on the calories, but you need to have a caloric excess to maximize your muscle gains. So that right there is 80, probably 90% of it. And anything else is probably completely pointless unless you are a very good athlete, in which case you're going to be looking for what's the next, like someone who's very close to their potential, who's at 90% at their potential, is going to need everything in the book to figure out how to get from 90 to 91. Someone who's at 10% of their potential doesn't need to do anything. They just follow what I just said, and they're going to be at 30% of their potential in like 2 weeks. So I think it depends where you are. If you haven't put on much muscle before and you're not a very if you're not well trained, meaning you've been at this for 5 or 10 years consistently, then I wouldn't do anything else. But in terms of doing other things, creatine supplementation for sure. And there's a couple other things, but they're probably not worth it to most people, I would say. Thank you, Anita. Mark Lanza says, I'm about to embark on the nutritional testing suggestions you provided. Total cost seems to be about $3,000. Does this seem about right? Also, any updates on the list other than HDRI, EGR mentioned in the B2 discussion? In terms of updates so this is a reference to the Testing Nutritional Status, the Ultimate Cheat Sheet. And he's talking about the comprehensive screening, which is used in the time-saving approach and the comprehensive approach, and is not used in the cost-saving approach for the reason that, that sounds about right. I mean, it probably would run you $2,000 or $3,000. I didn't tabulate up every test. I'm putting out version 1.2 of the cheat sheet any day now. I did the bulk of the work last night. I'll probably do some more tonight. Maybe I'll finish it tonight. That will thoroughly update the riboflavin and niacin sections and a small update to the MTHFR protocol. Most of that was covered in the riboflavin podcast, and the niacin podcast is recorded. It's not done processing yet, but I did not change any of the testing recommendations in the niacin podcast. I did change some of the signs and symptoms and toxicity stuff. But in terms of testing, what I would say is if you're trying to save money, take out the stuff from HDRI across the board. except for niacin. For niacin, I really believe that the erythrocyte NAD and NADPH from HDRI, you're not going to get better than that. But there's a lot of things in there where there's a main markers that are really good in Genova or LabCorp or Quest, and then it's supplemented with HDRI. So I would say, with the exception of niacin, you could, if you wanted to cut down on the cost, I would take the HDRI test out of that. And I say that in part to save costs, and part just because I'm very on the fence about HDRI. There's a lot of things that I don't like about them as a company, but I rely on them for certain things because there's just no one else testing those. Probably $2,000 to $3,000. Probably you could save a significant amount of money by taking most of the HDRI tests out, but leave in the niacin one. Thanks, Mark. Kevin says, any thoughts on cod liver oil and Jigsaw Alaskan cod liver oil in particular, non-fermented? Good, bad, and different, not familiar with it. I can show you the label or the website. Yeah, Kevin, if you want to shoot the website into the chat, I'll take a look at it. I'm not familiar with this cod liver oil. My main criteria would be whether it has a good enough fat-soluble vitamin content. So if I'm looking at a cod liver oil, the basic things that I'm looking for are vitamin A, vitamin D, and omega-3 fatty acids. I don't want something that is not going to give me 3,000 IU of vitamin A, at least 1,000 IU of vitamin D, ideally a little bit more than that. But I probably want to get at least 1,000 IU of vitamin D from my cod liver oil. And I don't really care about getting more than, say, 250 milligrams of EPA and DHA per day. So I would just judge it against that. Some cod liver oils are really poor in those vitamins, and some are very good. And then the other question is, are they natural? So I wouldn't say I'm 100% confident that you want necessarily them to be natural, but I'd prefer that they are natural. And a lot of cod liver oils take out the fat-soluble vitamins, then they process the oil, then they put synthetic vitamins back in. So let's see this. Okay, so they're comparing it to Rosita and Nordic Naturals. Looks like their EPA is a little higher. The DHA is a little higher than Rosita, a little lower than Nordic Naturals. The vitamin A looks considerably better than the rest of these. The vitamin D, none of them are that great in vitamin D. They don't add synthetic vitamins, and the price is in between the other two. It looks good to me. So you just have to be careful that if you're using, I'll put the link in the show notes. This is Jigsaw's cod liver oil. You just have to be cognizant of the fact that it's not giving you much vitamin D. So get your vitamin D elsewhere, whether it's going outdoors or whether it's supplementing in another way, or whether it's eating salmon and pastured egg yolks. Great source of vitamin A, pretty good, great source of omega-3 fatty acids, not a great source of vitamin D. Thanks, Kevin. Dale says, would you discuss the role that taurine might play in MTHFR? The reason I ask is that my personal experience with following an MTHFR protocol was helpful but underwhelming until I added a large bolus of taurine, 10 grams, on an empty stomach first thing in the morning. Adding taurine produced an immediate and dramatic improvement in my energy levels. Perhaps my experience can help others. Well, Dale, my suggestion is that the taurine's doing something that's got nothing to do with the MTHFR. So I might be wrong about that, but off the top of my end, I have underappreciated taurine historically. I haven't done a lot of research on it. I should do more. But it's. I just don't think your energy was low because of MTHFR. I think your energy was low for other reasons. So what does taurine do? Well, one of the things that it does in very large amounts is that it makes bile salts, which are helpful for absorbing your fat-soluble vitamins and all the other fat-soluble things in your diet. So maybe the taurine was doing that. So it might have just been dramatically helping your digestion. So that's one thing. And then it also does have some neurotransmitter-like effects. Off the top of my head, I'm not well studied on it. I think some of those effects are GABA-like in nature. And I kind of doubt that would lead to a dramatic increase in your energy. Maybe it does. And then it's also playing a role in electrical conductance in the retina. Maybe it does something like that in the brain that helps the brain's energy metabolism or neurotransmitter function just improve across the board. That might improve your energy. But I think whatever you experienced, although I can't explain it, I think it's not that it's missing from the MTHFR protocol. I think it's just that your problem was more related to taurine than it was to MTHFR. Thanks, Dale. Todd Becker says, can you speak to side effects from P5P, tinnitus, nightmares? Does it mobilize heavy metals? Is it the aldehydes? Well, the nightmares, I've never heard anyone say that, but what I can say is that, and to clarify for those who don't know, P5P is pyridoxal 5-phosphate. It is the active form of vitamin B6, and it is the form of vitamin B6 that you would get from animal foods, but it is different than the form of vitamin B6 that you would get from plant foods, which is pyridoxine. And the more expensive supplements of B6 are P5P, but the cheaper ones are pyridoxine, the form that's in plant foods. So she's asking about the P5P causing tinnitus and nightmares. The nightmares sound to me like they are similar to the intensity of dreams that is very widely reported with B6 supplementation. I do not know what causes that, but I do know that vitamin B6 is needed to make glutamate, and it's needed to make GABA, and it's going to be needed to make a number of neurotransmitters. So I suspect that you're probably just getting a big boost of certain neurotransmitters. Maybe it's glutamate. I just, off the top of my head, I don't know which neurotransmitters lead to that intensity of dreaming, or what would make the difference between intense and vivid non-nightmare dreams and nightmares. And to be honest, I'm kind of wondering right now whether that difference would be way more related to your subconscious than it would be to the P5P. In other words, maybe this is a very, maybe it's a very small dose of the effect that some people go after for therapeutic uses of psychedelics, in the sense that if you can really jack up your dreaming, you are in some way really digging into your subconscious. And just like some people might, and I'm not telling anyone to go out and use psychedelics therapeutically, I'm not advocating it here, I'm just thinking about it out loud. Just like some people might have a bad trip on LSD, because even in a therapeutic context, because of certain things that they need to work through in their subconscious, then maybe P5P jacking up your dreaming is just the specific things that your brain needed to dream about were nightmarish. So that's one possibility. The tinnitus, clearly that indicates some kind of inflammation in the ear. I don't know. I do know that in pyridoxine responsive seizures, which is a very rare defect, all of the B6 gets kind of clogged up, stuck to an enzyme that does two things. One is that it leads to the accumulation of toxic aldehydes, but the other thing is it just depletes all the B6 in the body. So perhaps the P5P is being diverted into some kind of toxic effect like that. And that might explain both a need for the B6, but also why you could get some negative experiences from it. Personally, what I would do is I would cut back on the dose, and I would try to find the dose. Really, you're looking at 5 or 10 milligrams that might have an effect on the low end, and you're looking at 100 milligrams at the absolute cap. And I would just look for the dose that is maximally effective with minimal side effects within that range. And I wouldn't go higher than 100. And the reason I wouldn't go higher than 100 is that The Institute of Medicine set the upper limit at 100 on the basis that the lowest dose reported for neuropathy from pyridoxine, not pyridoxal, but pyridoxine, the cheaper supplement, the one that has plant form B6, was 500 milligrams, and they wanted a giant safety window. So there's although there's a lot of people on the internet who claim that they have negative effects of smaller doses, I don't believe there are any case reports using anything lower than 500 milligrams. And even in those cases, the neuropathy goes away. The neuropathy in those cases is usually peripheral neuropathy. So you're talking about stuff going wrong in your hands and feet, not in your ears or your brain. But if presumably the basis for side effects is fairly similar. So my suspicion based on that, where there's much severe problems from even way higher doses, if that goes away when you take away the B6, then I would think this would go away when you take the dose out, when you take the dose down as well. Thank you, Todd, for your question. Kevin Goldstein says, was Kevin the one? Oh, Kevin was the one who asked about the Jigsaw cod liver oil. He says, while I'm at it, what about the Jigsaw magnesium supplements? I had a terrible experience with quinolone several years ago and definitely still need supplemental magnesium. It's dimagnesium malate. I have an occasional client who swears by this being the best thing ever. I'm fine with magnesium malate. I have looked at the Jigsaw magnesium supplement in the past, and it looked fine to me. It's combined with a few other things. And I think if you're getting benefits from taking it, you should keep taking it. Gary Krieger says, what might cause high normal range TSH, T4, reverse T3, and free T3? Good free T3 level, not lowering TSH. Does T3 negative feedback to lower TSH occur when T4 is converted to T3 or after T3 uptake in the cell? Thank you. Okay, so Gary, I believe your question is, if your free T3 looks good, why is your TSH still a little high? Why hasn't the T3 brought it down enough? Well, actually, 90% of and let me back up for people who aren't familiar with this. So your thyroid gland makes thyroid hormone. Thyroid hormone increases your metabolic rate and does a lot of related things. And your hypothalamus is governing that by controlling your pituitary, the master endocrine gland, and its secretion of TSH, which is what controls the thyroid gland and makes it make more thyroid hormone. So the way that the feedback occurs is that the circulating T4 is inside the cells of the pituitary, converted to T3, and that is what suppresses the production of TSH, which is basically the pituitary is monitoring the thyroid hormone levels to know whether the thyroid has done its job. So if the pituitary, the master endocrine gland decides that the thyroid has done its job, it takes down TSH, the signal to make more thyroid hormone. So you really are not looking at whether the free T3 is suppressing the TSH. 90% of that suppression comes from circulating T4 that's converted to T3 inside the thyroid gland. So you really are looking at whether the T4 is on the high end of normal or not. And if it is on the high end of normal and the TSH is still a little high, then that to me indicates that, and it's not clear to me from your question whether the reverse T3 is on the high side of normal as well, or if you meant that they were all good, meaning the reverse T3 is low. So if your reverse T3 is on the higher end of normal, then that explains it. Your body you basically have your brain telling your thyroid gland that it needs more thyroid hormone, but you have much of the rest of your body deciding that it's not in the position to carry out the effects on the metabolic rate that the thyroid hormone is demanding. And so it's converting the thyroid hormone into reverse T3, which is basically a thyroid antagonist. So if your reverse T3 is high, then I think you want to look at things like calorie intake, carb intake, and stress levels, because I think those are the main things that might make your body want to resist the signal of thyroid hormone by making the reverse T3. If the reverse T3 is good, meaning it's pretty low, then I think that means that there's something either in your brain, specifically in the hypothalamus, or in the pituitary, or somewhere in the combination, where they're just deciding that your body needs more thyroid hormone than you have. And my suspicion is that that's going to relate to how sensitive your cells are to the thyroid hormone. If your cells are somewhat resistant, and remember in the last AMA, this got brought up, and I talked about zinc deficiency and high free fatty acids being the primary things that are going to reduce sensitivity to thyroid hormone, or cellular uptake. So there's some indications that high free fatty acids might also decrease cellular uptake, but not much is known about what governs cellular uptake. And in fact, there are some genetic variations in cellular uptake. So if the thyroid hormone levels are high in your blood because they're not getting into the cells, then that could easily explain everything. It's just that your problem seems pretty moderate because you're not saying that your thyroid hormones are sky high and your TSH is sky high. You're just saying everything's a little on the high side of normal. So it sounds like there's not a big problem, but that your body does want something somewhere. Your body is determining that you need a little bit more thyroid hormone. And so if you can address zinc, free fatty acids, and I would address zinc and free fatty acids as the top things. Unless the reverse T3 is high, I would target carbs, calories, and stress. All right, Gary, I hope that helps. Thank you for your question. Carl Rayner says, cataract in one eye becoming noticeable. This eye had a posterior detachment about 11 years ago, which is basically healed. Have been on a low-carb diet for over 40 years. Eat raw cream, cheese, eggs, meat, and liver. In past few years, adding fasting and more keto diet. Saw your thoughts about glutathione on the cheat sheet, an interview with Wendy Myers. Am I on the right track and what else could I do? Grain intolerant, what testing beyond normal tests might be helpful? I believe that cataracts in the eye are largely driven by the glycation of lens proteins. And the glycation of lens proteins is largely driven by methylglyoxal, which I did my doctoral dissertation on. Methylglyoxal is in direct contradiction to much of the low carbohydrate literature. Glycation is not all driven by carbs. So methylglyoxal is quantitatively the most important source of advanced glycation end products in the body. And methylglyoxal can be derived from glucose, or it can be derived from ketones, or it can be derived from protein. And no one has ever done a very good study to determine whether you have more methylglyoxal on a ketogenic diet versus a high carb diet. But there was one poorly designed study where they took a small handful of people. They said, here's the Atkins diet, new diet, or what is it called? Atkins New Diet Revolution, or whatever that book was called. They said, here, read this, go forth and do it. So they went home, presumably they read the book or part of it, and they tried to do it. They came back, they lost weight, they had elevated ketones, and guess what? They also had significantly higher methylglyoxal. And also everything in the pathway that leads from ketones to methylglyoxal was elevated. So it was, I would say the data were very strong that in those people, they had higher levels of methylglyoxal because they had higher ketone levels that were generating it. So they went on the Atkins diet and they worsened their glycation risk by making a lot more of the thing that causes most advanced glycation end products and the thing that is probably overwhelmingly driving cataracts. And, but they didn't show any health consequences. They certainly didn't measure cataracts in that study because that wasn't the point of it. And they left more questions than answers. So for example, what if they had a control group that lost the same amount of weight on a high carb diet? My suspicion is that methylglyoxal would have gone up during weight loss, but just not as much. I also think that if those people stabilized their new weight and then they worked carbs back into their diet, their methylglyoxal would go back down. So no, I don't think doing more. And in fact, I have a consulting client who developed cataracts that corresponded very well with when he started intermittent fasting. And he did have poor glutathione status. We were able to improve his glutathione status, but the cataracts didn't go away. So I feel like you're probably. Todd Becker asks, how do you test methylglyoxal levels? You don't. You look for, you become a guinea pig in a lab who's doing a study on it. That's about it. So I'm not against keto and I'm not against intermittent fasting, but if you're specifically talking about dealing with cataracts, you're probably not going to get the cataract to go away, but you probably can stop them from getting worse and stop them from forming. And I think intermittent fasting and keto is probably going in the wrong direction. One thing that I do think, I don't think you're going to measure your methylglyoxal levels, but I think you should test your glutathione levels because glutathione is what detoxifies methylglyoxal. And if you listen to my riboflavin podcast, we talked about cataracts being a sign of riboflavin deficiency and also being one of the things that's being investigated for whether riboflavin supplementation can help it. Why does riboflavin supplementation help that? For the exact same reason as when I went on that big, long-winded answer about glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency at the beginning, the riboflavin is there to boost glutathione recycling. So I think the story, all these pieces knit together to a very, very, very nice story, clean story saying what you want in your eye to avoid cataracts from forming and getting worse, forming in the first place and getting worse, is you want low levels of methylglyoxal in your lenses. And how do you get that? You have very good glutathione status. And the keto thing is a maybe. There's no maybe that maybe keto makes that better, but there's a maybe that maybe keto makes that worse. So you can't test the glutathione levels in your lens proteins, but you can test the glutathione levels in your blood. I would use the cheat sheet. In a very targeted way for everything that's relevant to your glutathione status. I would follow the recommendations in there about how to boost your glutathione status, and I would use your blood levels of glutathione as a metric. And rather than getting them in the normal range, I would try to get them as high within the normal range as you can and titrate your approaches according to what works. So test it every couple of months, make one very important change. Follow all the steps in optimizing glutathione status right now, or all the ones you're willing to do. Follow them for 8 weeks, test glutathione status, get a baseline glutathione if you can, but 8 weeks of all my suggestions or whatever you're willing to do with them, retest the glutathione, see if it helped. If it helped, then tweak one thing at a time after that. Do that one thing very consistently and stably for 4 to 8 weeks, retest glutathione, and consider, whatever I said for glutathione, also consider maybe supplementing with high dose riboflavin in there. So maybe 100 milligrams or even maybe 100 milligrams of riboflavin at each meal. I would probably revise my glutathione recommendations in the cheat sheet to include that as a possibility. And optimize against glutathione and consider riboflavin supplementation and be very open-minded about the carbs, the keto, and the fasting because those might be great for many things, but they're definitely not optimal for glutathione or methylglyoxal. Thanks, Carl. Scott Lapidus says, do you have any gut experts you can recommend? Chris Kresser and everyone in his office, Analia Camarasa and Tim Sharp. Thanks, Scott. Doug says, from your deep dive into nicotinamide, riboside, and MN, do you think either is effective and is one preferred over the other? Do you still recommend taking TMG with NR? Yeah, so let me back up a little bit here. So these are all different forms of niacin. And in the anti-aging community, many people are taking nicotinamide riboside, which is NR, or nicotinamide mononucleotide, which is NMN. And the question is one of those better than the other? And then he asks me, do I still recommend taking trimethylglycine or TMG with NR? Because extra niacin depletes methylation, depletes methyl groups, and TMG is a methyl donor. So yeah, there are no human studies looking at NMN and how it's metabolized, and there are studies of NR. No one has showed any positive benefits of supplementing NR in humans yet, but they haven't really done any long-term studies or looked at many things, and they really haven't looked at anything that I would really want to see for NR. They've looked at things like, glucose and lipids and other metrics of metabolic health. Doesn't really do anything for that. I know Charles Brenner is doing a study on fatty liver. I don't want to bet money on it. No, I would bet I'm not really a betting man, but I'd be willing to bet like $200 or $300 on 3-to-1 odds that he doesn't show the benefits on fatty liver that he's expecting to, because the overwhelming thing about fatty liver is methyl donors. And he's published 2 papers showing that nicotinamide riboside causes an extreme increase in methylated niacin metabolites, like extreme increase. So when they're feeding people 2,000 milligrams of nicotinamide riboside, I don't know what portion is being methylated and peed out in the urine, but I know it's very high. So this is what I would say. My strong suspicion is that NMN is not absorbed intact. It's broken down into NR, and it's absorbed intact as NR, while NR is just absorbed intact in NR. And I believe that both of those supplements are going to lead to NR getting into the liver. And so, I would use NR because there's more data on NR. And I wouldn't use NMN because there isn't any data on it. But it probably makes no difference at all because they're probably both absorbed as NR. Maybe if your digestion is weaker, you're going to do better with NR than NMN because you probably almost certainly are not absorbing NMN intact. And if you're not digesting it, then you're absorbing less of it. But probably for most people, it makes no difference. I believe that both of these are going to generate NAD levels in the liver much more effectively than nicotinic acid or niacinamide would, the 2 common niacin supplements that are available on the market now and have been taken for ages. I think it'll be better at boosting NAD levels in the liver. And I think that will allow the liver to nourish many other tissues in the body to get a better NAD response in those tissues. My suspicion is that this is going to have a positive effect for anti-aging, for cellular repair. I think it's probably going to have a lot of promise for mental effects in the brain, where there's high NAD turnover for neurotransmitter release. I think it's going to have probably real good effects in the gut, where there's high NAD turnover because the gut faces so much damage by just being forced to deal with everything that you put into your body, unlike everything after the gut, after absorption, which has really high quality control. And I think it's going to be great for skin issues. Peter Attia told me in our recording that his patients who are taking it, the one thing that people report positive benefits with is rosacea. I think anything in the skin is going to be great for nicotinamide riboside and maybe NMN have a lot of promise just to improve cellular repair in the skin. And I don't know for sure, but I'm going to guess that maybe if there's another tissue after the brain, gut, and skin that have a lot of benefit, it's going to be the lungs. But that's a wild guess on my part. And so this is a bit speculative. It looks good in animals so far. I'm speculating that we're going to see these benefits if we do longer term studies in humans, but I think we will. In terms of the dose, I think when we get good data in humans, we're going to roll back the dose. I think 2,000 milligrams is just taxing the methyl supply too much. And most people are not consuming enough methyl donors in their diet to compensate for that. And so I think at some point we're going to, when in 10 years, when we have a lot more data, we're going to say, yeah, let's pull the dose back to like 300 milligrams. I think that in order to maximally retain, in order to get the best NAD response and to tax the methylation system the least, you want to take a smaller dose with every meal rather than taking a higher dose once. So I would take like 150 milligrams max at a meal. And if you're going to take 750 milligrams, I'd take 150 at each of 3 meals. If you want to take less than that, I'd you either use the powder or empty half of it out in a capsule. Like take half the capsule, empty it out into your mouth with a meal. 150 milligram capsule to do that. It'll give you 75 milligrams. Take that 3 times a day. And then, there's no good test to really see whether it's doing anything for you. So you really have to judge it by your response. Are you getting tangible benefits from it? If so, then I think it's fine to keep it up. But yeah, I would take 100 milligrams of TMG for every 200 milligrams of nicotinamide riboside or nicotinamide mononucleotide. And I personally, I wouldn't use the NMN, I'd use the NR because there's more data on it. Thanks, Doug. Tiana says, do you know any differences in carbohydrate lipid metabolism in someone who has congenital adrenal hyperplasia? Tiana, I don't know anything about congenital adrenal hyperplasia right now. And let's see. So if their adrenal hormones are elevated, that's probably going to drive fatty acids into gluconeogenesis and is probably going to drive glucose into the brain and, let's see, probably going to drive glucose into the blood, the brain, and into the liver, and is probably going to make muscles and other tissues rely more on fatty acids. So I don't know if it's going to do anything to whole body. I don't know if it has any implications for whether you should eat high carb or low carb. And of course, I might, someone else who knows more about the condition might give a very different answer from me. Tiana clarifies lacking the enzyme to convert 7-hydroxyprogesterone into cortisol. Yeah, okay, so maybe those effects aren't going to show up. I would have to study the condition better to know if it has any implications for lipid or carbohydrate choices. Sorry, Tiana, but thank you for your question. Anonymous says, is it good insurance to supplement minerals that are less studied like chromium, molybdenum, and boron, or do you think it's unlikely to be beneficial? I think most people don't get enough molybdenum. I think that's, it's not well studied, but I think if you don't eat legumes, you should probably supplement with molybdenum. And I think if you eat a diet that's high in animal protein and low in legumes, then you definitely should supplement molybdenum. I don't know about chromium and boron. I think it's, a low dose is probably a good idea just as extra insurance. But yeah, I don't see any harm in taking low doses of those. But I wouldn't go taking very high doses of them because they're not well studied. And I think eating a diverse diet and a high quality diet is probably the best way to get those lesser studied trace minerals in. Yeah. Thank you, Anonymous. Kevin says, I just had a blood test that showed high LDL, but it didn't differentiate between small and dense LDL particles and large and fluffy particles. What should I do? What tests should I take to determine if I have a problem? So, I have very good friends and colleagues who would disagree with me on this, but I honestly think that most people, most of the time, can go with the total to HDL cholesterol ratio as a predictor of heart disease risk. I don't know if the science is really out there on picking which particle testing you should do. But I have not revisited that topic for a few years. I remember that there were a lot of different conflicts between the different labs. So I'm not too well versed on the different lab options for testing those. One thing that I would say is that when you're comparing small dense LDL and large fluffy LDL in terms of heart disease risk, those comparisons are controlling for LDL levels. So it's not like it's not like small dense LDL is harmful and large fluffy LDL is helpful. It's just that small dense LDL being high is more harmful than large fluffy LDL being high, if that makes sense. So I think there's a lot of options, and I think that a simple ApoB test would be a fairly good metric to see whether you're seeing the same thing with the ApoB versus the high LDL, right? So my guess is your ApoB is going to be high, but if your ApoB is not proportionally high as your LDL is, then you probably have large fluffy LDL simply on the basis that an ApoB is a good proxy for the LDL particle count. So if you have low ApoB, you have low LDL particle counts, and if you have high LDL cholesterol, then you have a lot of cholesterol in a small number of particles, which means that you have large fluffy particles. And so that, what I would say is go out and get the ApoB first. If it's consistent with this, then probably the more tests you order, the more you're just going to see more of the same. But if the ApoB conflicts with your LDL, like if the ApoB is low and the LDL is high, then I think at that point you can get more advanced testing. And I don't know what to recommend off the top of my head just because I so infrequently ever see a use for it. But I'll do some looking around and maybe do a short light video or something on the topic of choosing the best lipid tests. Thanks, Kevin. Pam Schoenfeld says, do you know a potential reason that a high LDL is associated with prostate cancer? Oh, Kevin is chatting. You said which ratio and what ratio should I be looking for? The total cholesterol divided by the HDL cholesterol gives you the total to HDL cholesterol ratio. And that under 4 is low risk. My suspicion, there's not a lot of data, is that close to 3.0 is the best place to be. And the more you rise above 4, the greater your risk is. And I believe that the total to HDL cholesterol ratio captures, in someone that's not on drugs specifically designed to alter it, I think it captures a lot of the information that is in the other tests. So I think the overwhelming thing that you want to be concerned about is how long of a time are my LDL particles spending in my blood? And the reason I think that is, look at risk, right? The main determinant of how long the LDL particle spends in your blood is your activity of the LDL receptor. People who have LDL receptors that don't work have familial hypercholesterolemia. If they have one LDL receptor that doesn't work, they start getting a high risk of heart disease in their 40s instead of in their 70s. If they have 2 LDL receptors that don't work, they can get heart disease as young as 18 months old. So that's one extreme. On the other side is PCSK9 defects. PCSK9 degrades the LDL receptor. PCSK9 therefore lengthens the amount of time that LDL particles spend in your blood. People who have defective PCSK9 can't degrade the LDL receptor, and so they have high LDL receptor activity, and the LDL spends very little time in their blood. They have virtual complete abolition from heart disease. In the middle, we have people's cholesterol levels being not completely, but very much largely explained by how long does the LDL particle spend in their blood. And all the drugs that reduce the risk of heart disease do so by increasing the activity of the LDL receptor and making LDL spend less time in the blood. So what happens, just across the spectrum, you could plant LDL receptor activity or LDL residence time, which is the length of time that LDL spends in the blood. You could plot that against heart disease risk, and you'd have a very, very perfect line that's just linear across all the activity, where the higher the LDL receptor activity, you get a dose-dependent decrease in the risk of heart disease up until the point where you have like genetically defective control over it that leads to maximal LDL receptor, and you have almost zero risk of heart disease. So I think you want high LDL receptor activity. So what happens when LDL spends a lot of time in the blood? Well, first of all, because LDL particles are going into the blood, but they're not coming out, the number of particles increases. So you have a high particle count, you have high ApoB. Then what else happens? Well, cholesterol moves from HDL particles to LDL particles. So your LDL cholesterol goes up, your HDL cholesterol goes down. What else happens? Well, as the cholesterol moves into the LDL particles, because the cholesterol is the smallest and most dense thing when cholesterol comes in, triglycerides leave the LDL particle. Cholesterol is smaller and denser than triglycerides, and so the LDL particle becomes smaller and it becomes denser. So you have small, dense LDL. What else happens? Well, the thing that's actually contributing to heart disease is the LDL particle is oxidizing because the antioxidants are running out, and the LDL, when the antioxidants run out, the LDL oxidizes. And when the LDL oxidizes, what does that do to the particle? It makes phospholipids that are oxidized come off of the particle gets smaller and denser. So literally every test that you could possibly get is telling you, I believe, the degree to which those tests correlate with heart disease is the degree to which they're giving you the same information, which is how long are the LDL particles spending in your blood, and therefore what is the oxidation risk? And it's the oxidation that causes heart disease. Because none of those tests are testing the thing that, and there are tests for oxidized LDL. But the LDL is not oxidizing in your blood where the tests test it. It's oxidizing behind the blood vessel wall where the tests can't test it. And when LDL oxidizes, it gets very quickly leaves the blood. So probably the test for oxidized LDL is a good metric of the actual amount of LDL oxidation, but that's not obvious. So 0 of these tests are actually testing the thing that causes heart disease, which is LDL oxidizing in the subendothelial space, which is beneath the first layer of the blood vessel wall. None of them test that. And you can argue about which of them are best at predicting the risk of heart disease, but since I believe that literally all of them are, the degree to which they predict heart disease, the degree to which they give you imperfect information about whether your LDL is oxidizing, because of that, then why just look at this and I say, why do 3,000 tests? Why not just take something that's fairly well predictive? If everything about your health looks great, and if the things that you would do to control the total HDL cholesterol ratio are things that would hurt your health, then you want more information, right? Because the choice of what to do isn't obvious. But if whatever you would do to manage the total HDL cholesterol ratio would make you feel better and would make you healthier than you currently are, then why do more testing? Just do the things that are healthy. But if you feel that it's giving you a choice where doing those things is going to hurt some aspect of your health, or it's going to be extremely inconvenient, or it's going to make you less happy, or something like that, then sure. go out and do some more testing. Test the ApoB, test the particle size, test the LDL pattern, pattern A, pattern B, small dense versus large fluffy. Get those more complicated tests and see if they tell you something different than what the total to HDL cholesterol ratio did. Can they? Absolutely. At that time, you need to do more work to determine which thing is the right metric to follow. But my guess is that 80 to 90% of the time, maybe more than that, I'm not sure, those tests are mostly going to tell you the same thing. And so if most of those tests are in agreement about where you stand in heart disease risk, you're just back to square one, that you need to adjust that. And if most of those things are in agreement, then why get lots of tests every time? Why not just say, these things correlate really well. I'm going to get the dirt cheap thing that everyone else gets, that the doctor is going to order anyway, and just use that as the metric over time. So that's how I would handle that. Okay, Pam Schoenfeld says, do you know a potential reason that high LDL is associated with prostate cancer? And what do you think of anatochorinals? What do I think of tocotrienols? Anato? Pam, if you're listening to this, can you reply and tell me what you meant by anato? I think you mean mixed tocotrienols to lower LDL, which are a form of vitamin E. I have no idea why high LDL is associated with prostate cancer, but I know why it's associated with heart disease, and so I would manage it along those lines like I was just describing. And then what do I think of tocotrienols to lower LDL? I don't know. I think there's some literature out there showing that they do so, but I would start with fat, carbohydrate, calories, overweight, and microbiome first, and then I would probably add psyllium husk if it doesn't cause GI distress. If psyllium husk causes GI distress, then I would try the tocotrienols, see if they work. If they do, then I think that should be a tool in the belt. But because I don't think that it's really normal to have, like physiologically normal to have high doses of tocotrienols floating around, I'm a little more skeptical about using them in that way for that reason. Okay. Anonymous says, with respect to omega fatty acids testing, using dried spot via omega quant. In the Masterjohn Light 101 and Testing Nutritional Status, the Ultimate Cheat Sheet, only blood fatty acid testing is mentioned. PubMed appears to show good agreement between dried blood and blood draw for fatty acid quantification. Yeah, I'm gonna revise the cheat sheet to recommend the omega quant test on the basis that they do RBCs. When I wrote the cheat sheet, I wasn't aware of the omega quant test, so I didn't know that was available. And actually, thank you for reminding me, because I did have it in mind to make that revision, and I might have otherwise forgotten to do so for version 1.2. So I'll try to get that into version 1.2. Doug Simpson says, what could cause all of the following to be low at the same time? Phenylalanine, tyrosine, tryptophan, glutamic acid, taurine, and threonine. Could a strict keto diet be a cause, or do you suspect vitamin and mineral deficiencies as a cause? What would I supplement to address the issue? Well, phenyl is it also the case that the tryptophan to large nonpolar amino acid ratio and the phenylalanine to tyrosine ratio are also elevated? Because if they are, that might alter my response to that. So let me come back to that if you can answer that. Pam Schoenfeld says, can a B12 deficiency that may have existed for over 1 year and is now being treated with injections cause irreversible effects, specifically burning sensations in the legs after physical activity and fatigue. Have you ever heard of these? Also, in your cheat sheet, you mentioned checking serum and urine MMA to see if it's getting into cells. Can serum B12 be near 2000 but still a problem if a person has signs of B12 deficiency? These are two different scenarios. Okay, so let's take them one at a time. So can a B12 deficiency that has existed for years cause irreversible effects that cause burning sensations in the legs after physical activity and fatigue? Usually in B12 deficiency, the non-cognitive symptoms start in the feet and work their way up. And exercise intolerance, it makes sense for them for almost anything to get worse after exercise, since you're placing more demands on everything that's going into the pathways that are deficient. And in B12 deficiency, a big part of all the neurological stuff is probably driven by methylmalonic acid accumulating. It might be the MMA causing damage, and it might be the inability to utilize it for the citric acid cycle. And the citric acid cycle is involved in energy. So if you have increased protein breakdown, you're going to generate more MMA, and you're going to demand more energy if you're exercising. So that would be a reason why it would get worse. The neurological degeneration can be irreversible. I don't know whether that specific thing is irreversible, but that's one of the reasons why we should be very proactive about B12 status, especially in anyone at risk, which is vegetarians, vegans, anyone over the age of 65, anyone who has H. pylori, which is 50% of people, and anyone who has peptic ulcers or any signs of gastritis. Like, everyone in those populations should be testing their B12 without any signs or symptoms of deficiency, in my opinion. And the reason is that because B12 deficiency causes irreversible nervous system damage. So I hope that can go away with time, but it might be irreversible. And then the second part of that question is, can the B12 be near 2000 but still be a problem if the person has signs of B12 deficiency? Yeah, that's why I would recommend looking at MMA. So I think, in the overwhelmingly vast majority of cases, the serum levels of B12 are probably going to be very good metrics of overall B12 status. Probably the ranges should be increased. So probably we should want everyone's to be near the top of the current range and maybe a little bit over that's used in the United States. But when you have people that have problems that are not, that you're willing to ask questions about, they might have atypical problems. So B12, there are genetic defects in B12 transport, and there are genetic defects in the enzyme that gets rid of methylmalonic acid, and there are genetic defects in activating B12 to adenosylcobalamin, which is needed to activate that enzyme. So I would go on the MMA, and if the MMA is high, that person has a problem no matter what the B12 level says. And it might not be a nutritional B12 problem. It could be a metabolic B12 problem. And the solution might be more difficult to tease apart. It might not have a perfect ending, but there's almost certainly something you can do to manage it. And so you want to know what it is, right? So you definitely want to know what the MMA is. You definitely want to look into it further if it's elevated. If it conflicts with B12, then you need to kind of sit down with all the literature on all the B12 related inborn errors of metabolism and look at what, if any of those might be more probable versus a nutritional problem. And then you need to test out what might be the right course of actions, try to correct them and see if you can make those signs and symptoms go away. But so I'll say there was someone on my Facebook whose child was having seizures and whose MMA was very high. and the endocrinologist, who's I don't think the right person to see in this case, but the endocrinologist said, well, the B12 is normal, so it doesn't matter that the NMA is high, and there's nothing wrong. And that is utterly nuts. I mean, seizures are something wrong, are they not? So yeah, I mean, if there is a problem if the NMA is high, you just don't know what it is. You're welcome, Pam. Kevin says, any chance you might have some suggestions for how to handle MSG sensitivity other than avoiding it, which I do? It gives me major headaches and I almost never get headaches when I haven't had MSG. Limits what I can eat. I can't even eat bone broth because it's been cooked for so long. Some of the glutamine hydrolyzed to glutamate. Problem started somewhere about 30 to 35 years ago. I'm 70 as of today. Then Lawrence Tam replied, in the old days, some MSG manufacturers advertised their products as brain food containing amino acids beneficial to the brain. Restaurants use it liberally, believing they're actually increasing nutritional values of the food. Yeah, so I'm not 100% confident that everyone who reacts to what they believe is glutamate is glutamate. A lot of the foods that are high in glutamate are also high in GABA, and they can have a weird response to the GABA. There's some other amines in there and so on. So I think there's a gray area here. What we know is that most people, the normal processing of glutamate is that your intestines consume such a massive amount of it that most people, when you measure the blood levels of glutamate, you can feed them mega doses of MSG and the blood levels don't even change because the intestines consume so much of the glutamate. Then if the blood levels do rise, the glutamate will cross the blood-brain barrier, but it will be pumped back into the blood so fast that there's no net crossing of the glutamate into the brain, providing that your electrolytes are well balanced and that your energy metabolism is on point. So I think that if you're hypersensitive to glutamate, then you probably have something wrong with your energy metabolism or your electrolytes. And the first things that I would target would be the B vitamins involved in energy metabolism, the major electrolytes, especially sodium, chloride, and potassium, to a lesser degree, calcium and magnesium. And those would be if there are any macronutrients in your diet, like if you're on low carb or low fat, consider adjusting your diet a little bit to see if it improves your energy. If you've got anything wrong with thyroid or insulin, deal with those as the underlying thing. I think those should be the things that are most important to creating a physiologically normal response to glutamate. Then if those don't work, I don't know exactly why that is, but I think probably to counter it, supplementing with, well, actually, let me say this. I think, see how you respond to GABA supplements on their own. Because if you have a calming effect to GABA, that's normal. But if you have a backwards effect to GABA, then that's part of your problem, and the supplement's not going to help. But if you have a normal reaction to GABA or glycine, then I think taking 1 to 800 milligrams of GABA and 3 to 5 grams of glycine with those meals might help counteract the glutamate. And I would speculate that maybe supplementing with oxaloacetate or vitamin B6 could help. But Pam says, I used to get glutamate reactions such as skull pressure, but with overall much better nutrition, I no longer experience. Yeah, so there's probably a nutrient missing. Magnesium and B6 would be definite factors that could be at play. And I'll post a link in the show notes where I did a couple episodes on glutamate sensitivity that might give a little bit more detail. Thank you for your question. Heather Chandler says, do you know of a good commercially available test for carnitine? Yeah, LabCorp has carnitine tests. So LabCorp. Also, I would say I don't know why you're testing carnitine, but you might want to get the free and total carnitine if you have energy problems, because it could give you more information. Heather Chandler says, is it true that we can't absorb more than 1.5 grams of creatine at one time? I don't think that's true. From what I looked at, it looked like the absorption of creatine was really, really good. I don't know if someone was arguing maybe that we don't retain more than that, but I think the retention of your muscles is going to be best with creatine if you take it post-workout and if you take it with carbohydrate to stimulate insulin. But on the whole, I think that the absorption and retention is good enough that it's more a matter of how fast will you get to peak muscular creatine than it is about where you get in the long term, right? So maybe if you follow all the best procedures to absorb and retain creatine, you'll get to the 30% increase in muscular creatine in 2 weeks, taking 5 grams a day instead of 4 weeks. And maybe someone who doesn't follow any best practices takes 6 weeks. But, 10 weeks later, you're probably going to be at peak effect if you just take 5 grams of creatine at a time without paying attention to all the details around absorption. Okay, so I had started Doug's question about low amino acids across the board earlier, and then he replied to me. I think the two ratios I requested, phenylalanine to tyrosine ratio is high, tryptophan to large nonpolar amino acid ratio is low. And also, I remember from last time, Doug, your glutamate to glutamine ratio was low. So I still, barring some other explanation, I still think that the glutamine is, glutamate is mopping up ammonia to generate glutamine. I think that's one separate thing. I think if the phenylalanine to tyrosine is high and the tryptophan to large nonpolar amino acid ratio is low, then I think that means that tryptophan is being, the beginning of tryptophan metabolism is accelerated, but there are some block-ups maybe in converting phenylalanine to tyrosine. So, Doug, can you I want to come back to this again. Can you tell me whether the 5-hydroxyindole acetic acid is high or low? And then I'll come back to your question. In the meantime, I'll go to your next question, which is what are the pros and cons of boosting sulforophane? So sulforophane, and we're at time, so let's stop any new incoming questions, and I'll try to finish what I have in here. So sulforophane, nice thing is it promotes detoxification. Bad thing is it raises the need for iodine. I don't know what ratio to take, but you definitely want to make sure that you're getting some kind of iodine into your diet, whether it's through like 200 micrograms of iodine from a kelp powder supplement, or you experiment with milligram amounts from a broken up iodoral tab or whatever. Because I don't know the dose, I'm just going to say work slowly and work your way up. And certainly if you have any signs of hypothyroidism or you have any brain fog, increase the iodine or decrease the sulforophane would be my opinion. Okay, Doug comes back and clarifies 5-hydroxyindole acetate is high. Okay, so your tryptophan is low because you are making a lot of serotonin turning it into a lot of serotonin. And you mentioned last time the estrogen was high, so you're also probably depleting tryptophan by diverting it into the kynurenine pathway, which is a way to get rid of the tryptophan as well as to make niacin. But you have some, and so even though, yeah, okay. So you also have some things backed up in tyrosine synthesis. Oh, interesting. So the phenylalanine is, okay. Let me, I want to look up one thing to see if I can give a better answer to this while looking it up. Excuse me for 1 second. All right, I'm just trying to look up an extra point about tryptophan metabolism that I can't remember off the top of my head. Okay, so I'm probably not going to get to it in a time efficient manner. So let me just say this. So my overall judgment on this is not a result of low protein. This is a result of several different aspects of metabolism. The strict keto diet might be raising your ammonia because ketones, their excretion into the urine requires an equimolar excretion of ammonia for acid-base balance, meaning that for every molecule of ketone that you put into your urine, you have to put a molecule of ammonia there. So you probably have a metabolic response that's raising ammonia. And, even though I would think you would be actually breaking down glutamine to get that ammonia. Yeah, you know what? I'm sorry, but I think more than that is going on. So I think if it were only the case that your ketones were putting one ammonia into your urine for every ketone that goes into your urine, which does happen. If that were the only thing happening, I would think it'd be breaking down glutamine to make that happen. And yet it sounds like glutamate is mopping up ammonia to make glutamine. So it sounds like you have more ammonia than what you would need for that purpose. And that would also be consistent with having tryptophan being degraded into the kynurenine pathway, which we talked about last time. So you might be eating too much protein, or you just might be putting way too much demand for gluconeogenesis on your body, and that's generating the ammonia. So I'd look at your protein and carbohydrate intake. If you're eating like 10 grams of carbs per day, then I think you want to eat more than that, and that's your overwhelming thing there. If you're eating like 2 grams of protein per pound of body weight, which you're probably not doing on keto, but if you were, then I would say lower your protein. My guess is protein is not your problem. Your carb is just way too low, that you're putting way too much stress in your body for gluconeogenesis. And that's that. I'm not sure what seems to be messing with your phenylalanine and tyrosine ratio right now, but I think you are definitely overproducing serotonin. And I'm not sure why, but serotonin is a response to stress, and demand for gluconeogenesis is a stress. So my suspicion is that a lot of these things might be improved if you simply bring the carbohydrate up. So I would think about why you are keto and what you're getting out of it, and then make the decision to increase carbs that is measured against what your goals are. So, for example, if you're trying to maintain a certain millimolar BHB because that's giving you neurological benefits, then you have to increase carbs in that context and make sure you maintain ketone levels up. If you're trying to lose weight or something like that, then there's 1,000 other ways to do that, and maybe you can increase the carbs a lot more than that. But I think you definitely have alterations in stress response, gluconeogenesis, and ammonia metabolism as a result of excessive carbohydrate restriction. Hope that helps. All right, Anonymous says, high linoleic acid, low arachidonic acid, and DGLA on a fatty acid test seems to suggest lack of activity in the delta-6 desaturase enzyme. Yep. Given a diet already rich in liver and egg yolks and fairly low in LA, can you give any suggestions for increasing delta-6 desaturase activity? Yeah, I mean, I don't know that increasing your delta-6 desaturase activity is the top thing. So there's a bunch of nutrients involved in that. So many that you basically just need to do a comprehensive nutritional screening for whether something's missing there. And you might just have low activity by genetics. So it's probably not worth solving that problem. The big governor, though, is going to be if you have insulin resistance or you have low insulin levels from chronic carbohydrate restriction, that might increase it. But you also look at your inflammation, because you might have some of the higher fatty acids being depleted from inflammation or oxidative stress. But more nutrient-dense diet across the board, more carbohydrate. If that doesn't do it, then just maybe take a supplement or increase the liver and egg yolks to the point where the arachidonic acid is normal, unless the driving thing. So measure your CRP, and if that's high, address inflammation. And in the Testing Nutritional Status, the Ultimate Cheat Sheet, I have a big section on oxidative stress. I'd go through that testing. A starting point might be Genova's Oxidative Stress 2.0 blood panel. But if inflammation and oxidative stress are the things, work on those. If those aren't issues, then more nutrient density across the board, fix any nutrient deficiencies you find, increase carbohydrate if you're on low carb. And if none of those things work, then just increase the arachidonic acid level in your diet. Anonymous says, what can be done nutritionally to specifically improve antiviral immunity? Certainly the fat-soluble vitamins A and D, both important. Lauric acid as a fat, so coconut oil might be a good fat choice for the fat in your diet. Monolaurin would be a very good choice for a supplement. So lauricidin is the best monolaurin to take, 3 to 10 grams a day. Be careful of your bowel tolerance. Spread it out among your meals, and cut back if it starts to loosen your stool. Elderberry, which has mostly been studied in the context of flu, but probably has good antiviral properties. Garlic, garlic appears to require very high doses if you're just taking a garlic extract. If you're taking stabilized allicin, 180 micrograms a day is good. But you could raise the question, what if you're missing on some of the other important compounds in the garlic? And so I'll debate with some of my friends about that. But what's really been tested is 180 micrograms of stabilized allicin. And then zinc, for sure, in the immune response is super important. And then you get back to nutrient density. So there, although I give special importance to vitamins A and D, arachidonic acid just mentioned, zinc and copper, both. And then those supplements, if you're missing any one particular nutrient, then you're going to wind up with a specific vulnerability that will persist until you fix that one nutrient. Thanks, Anonymous. Eric Kushbeck says, urea cycle question. High arginine, high ornithine, normal citrulline, very low aspartate, low glutamate, mid-range normal glutamine, all measured on LabCorp plasma amino acids, normal orotic acid on organic acids test. Diets 1.3 grams of protein per kilogram body weight a day or less. BMI is 19. More protein often causes stinky urine and general fatigue. Nutritional factors measure okay using blood, hair, and our urine is appropriate. Eating 200 grams of carbs a day. And so I guess the question is, why does my urine stink and do I feel fatigued when I eat more protein? Well, 1.3 grams per kilogram body weight is a lot of protein. Eric, can you clarify what the threshold is? Where does the fatigue and stinky urine start? Is it at higher than 1.2 grams per kilogram body weight, or is it a constant thing where the more protein you eat, the more you get it? Can you clarify that by replying to your comment? In the meantime, I'll just say that 1.3 kil. There really isn't good evidence for there being a benefit to consuming more protein than that. And however, it is sort of like the overwhelming experience of everyone who works with athletes that more is better for body composition, probably athletic performance. There's just not a lot of research demonstrating that. It's just the overwhelming anecdotal experience. So, you go to a conference at someone who, in my experience, I've been to a conference where Jose Antonio was talking about the ISSN recommendations for protein. And he was like, but everyone who wrote that position paper thinks that athletes should get more. Like, it's just as a comment on the side, So the anecdotal thoughts in the athletic sphere are more protein is better. Oh yeah, so you're interesting. Your body weight is. Yeah, no, you're right. Okay, yeah. Okay, so this is per kilogram body weight, and my brain might have been working in per pound body weight. So 1.3 grams per kilogram body weight is somewhere-ish around a half a gram per. So it's like the lower end of what I think is good. I should take that back. You could probably double that and still get benefits according to some of the literature. I do think I was making the error of reading that in pounds. I apologize for that. 100 grams of protein per day does it bad. Okay. So he clearly has a problem with generating more ammonia than he should be from the amount of protein in his diet. He's eating 200 grams of carbs per day, so he's not doing it for the sake of gluconeogenesis. He's not doing it for the sake of wanting to, of what we were talking about before about the need to balance acid-base factors when excreting ketones. So let me pull up a diagram that I have of the urea cycle. I think that'll help us. And maybe if I can, I will show it on the screen here. Keep this. Oh, here it is. Okay, let me see. How do I share my screen? So I'll share this. And then, all right, hopefully everyone can see my screen here. So this is the urea cycle. And, okay, so he says so what we have in the urea cycle is we have ammonia and bicarbonate coming in. We're trying to get rid of this ammonia. And over here we have some aspartate that is basically carrying one nitrogen-free ammonia that all wind up going into the 2 nitrogens of urea up here shown in pink. And so what we do is we combine bicarbonate with the first free ammonia to get rid of it. And then we go through a couple steps where we make ornithine, then we make citrulline, and then the aspartate brings in the second nitrogen, combines with citrulline, makes arginosuccinate, then makes arginine, and then the ammonia of arginine gets cleaved off to the urea, to be excreted in the urine. And so his question is, his arginine is high. Okay, so high ornithine, high arginine, normal citrulline, very low aspartate. So, okay, so ornithine is high. Citrulline was... Ornithine's high, normal citrulline, very low aspartate. All right, so the ornithine is building up here, and the ornithine then needs to make citrulline, and the citrulline needs to combine with aspartate. So either his aspartate is low because he doesn't have enough to contribute to the urea cycle, in which case the buildup would be at citrulline elevating, or his aspartate is low because it's getting sucked up at a dramatic rate into the urea cycle. And it sounds to me like the latter is the case because his ornithine is high and his citrulline is normal, right? So you're starting off with high ornithine that should generate high citrulline. And if the aspartate's there, the citrulline should be super, super high. If the aspartate's not there. So the ornithine is high, but the aspartate, this step here is going forward very fast, and the aspartate's just being completely sucked away, probably because there's so much citrulline here that he wants to get rid of it. And that's why his arginine is still high, right? Do I have that right, that arginine was high? Yeah, high arginine. Okay. So what that means then is, now I should also say arginine is a stimulator of the urea cycle, because what arginine does is it stimulates this first part. So if his arginine was high because he had so much arginine around and not because there was a defect in getting rid of it, then the arginine would basically be stimulating the urea cycle, and all the ammonia he generates from normal metabolism, he'd be very effective at getting rid of it because of the high arginine. So that means that the arginine is high because there's a backup here, because he's not effectively getting rid of the ammonia. So it seems like it must be the case. It's my guess, and I would have to sit down with this and with the data to be really, really sure. But my guess is that maybe the arginase enzyme is missing, and this is one of the rarer defects in the urea cycle. And because the arginase is missing, the arginine is very high. And although you would expect high arginine to stimulate this earlier part of the urea cycle, the fact it's probably backing up. High arginine is probably causing a backup in some of these steps here. And so something is accumulating before arginine here that is exerting some negative feedback on the cycle that counteracts what you would think would have been the effect of the high arginine. And so it seems like probably the primary thing is a defect in getting rid of that arginine. And so effectively, nitrogens that enter the cycle as ammonia are not able to be excreted in the urine. And effectively, this cycle must at some point slow down overall. And so something, as a result of not being able to get rid of arginine by cleaving off the urea and peeing it out, something around here is backing up even the first step down here, causing the ammonia to build up, free ammonia, which makes him feel fatigued because it's a poison to the central nervous system, and which makes his urine stink when he eats normal amounts of protein. So, I think the problem is arginase. And I'm not sure if there's anything simple you can do about it nutritionally. I think that you want to focus on managing it by keeping protein below 100 grams a day. I think you want to figure out what that threshold is, keep it down there, optimize other things about driving the protein into muscle. So anything that you can do to maximize the anabolic activity of your muscle is going to drive the protein into the muscle and prevent it from being broken down for energy, which is what's giving off this ammonia. And so you probably might do best if you include either like HMB, or which stimulates anabolic synthesis, or just doing the right workouts. Maybe even an amino acid mixture that is optimized for the exact ratios to maximize efficiency of muscle intake. I don't remember the name of it. I'll link to one in the show notes. It's called MAP or something like that. Might help. And you should probably go to someone to get this checked out, like a geneticist, because you probably do have a urea cycle defect. And my first guess right now is it's arginase, but I'm not a doctor. I can't diagnose anything like that. And so, yeah, those are my initial thoughts. All right, Anonymous says, I've read that supplemental vitamin E has been shown to have a negative impact on individuals with this specific polymorphism by raising levels of pro-inflammatory cytokines in the blood. Do you have a view on this? Forgot to add that SNP is in the glutathione transferase polymorphism. No, I just haven't. Oh, I didn't realize that my screen was still sharing. I'm sorry. No, I just haven't. I haven't looked into that because I think that the vitamin E supplements that people take are too high dose, and that people shouldn't be taking 1 to 400 IU of vitamin E a day. And so my guess is those studies were done with the standard high doses that people are using that I don't think anyone should be taking. And so it just never came up as an interesting topic to me. But I think that I don't think anyone should be supplementing with more than 20 IU of vitamin E per day as the alpha tocopherol portion, unless they are very specifically showing it's doing something for them, like lowering their lipid peroxides. But I think most people could get the effect that they need out of vitamin E by getting 20 IU of alpha tocopherol and a background of mixed tocopherols. And I doubt a low dose like that is going to harm many people, is my guess. And I doubt the studies on that have addressed it, the dose issue. Will the transcript be available for the AMA? Yeah, transcript is done. I'm proofreading it. Usually I have other people doing the proofreading, but I just have been generating too much content. So I got people that are making the transcripts tied up with that and with the 2-part niacin series that I'm going to give out for you guys as soon as the transcripts are done. Niacin podcast is 3.5 hours long, so it's being broken into 2 parts, but you should get both parts soon. And probably the AMA transcript from last time will be up tonight. Okay, Kevin says, I had an accidental double-blind test on this. I was eating canned tuna fish with no problem. Then one day I had a problem. I looked at the ingredients on the can again. They had hydrolyzed. Oh, Kevin's following up on the glutamate thing, I think. Kevin says he's fine. This is a follow-up to Kevin's question about glutamate sensitivity. He says he's fine with glutamate. He just can't taste things where... So I don't think the fact that you can eat steaks all day shows you're fine with free glutamate. Steaks have glutamate in proteins. And yeah, the savory flavor is going to be driven by some glutamate formed in your mouth that's acting on the umami receptors. But... he says he's fine with glutamine, not glutamate. Well, the steak has both. It's just that they're in proteins, right? So I think what I said before is a sufficient answer to that. I don't think this being fine with steak changes anything. Okay. All right, Pam says, excellent Q&A. Thanks. Looking forward to the next iteration of your cheat sheet for testing nutritional status. Yeah, that might be out tonight. It might be out in a couple days. And thank you, everyone. This was great. And I will talk to you all next time.
This episode is brought to you by Ancestral Supplements. Traditional peoples, Native Americans, and early ancestral healers believed that eating the organs from a healthy animal would strengthen and support the health of the corresponding organ of the individual. For example, the traditional way of treating a person with a weak heart was to feed the person the heart of a healthy animal. Modern science makes sense of this. Heart is uniquely rich in coenzyme Q10, which supports heart health. The importance of eating organs, though, is much broader than simply matching the organ you eat to the organ you want to nourish. For example, natives of the Arctic had very limited access to plant foods and got their vitamin C from adrenal glands. And vitamin C is important to far more parts of your body than simply your adrenals. In his epic work, Nutrition and Physical Degeneration, Weston Price recorded a story of natives who cured blindness using eyeballs, which are very rich in vitamin A. But now that we understand vitamin A, we know that we can get even more vitamin A by eating liver, making liver good for your eyes. Our ancestors made liberal use of organ meats both to be economical and to utilize their healing and nourishing properties. Animals in the wild do the same. Weston Price had also recorded a story of how the zoos in his era were capturing lions, tigers, and leopards, oh my, only to watch them become infertile in captivity. Researchers then observed what the lions did when they killed zebras in the wild. What they did was they went straight for the organs and bone marrow, leaving the muscle meat behind for the birds. But even the birds took what they could of the organs and bone marrow. Price reported that once the zookeepers started feeding the animals organ meats, boom, their fertility returned. The problem I often encounter, though, is that many people just don't like eating organ meats. Let's face it, if you weren't raised on them, it can be very hard to acquire a taste for them. That is where Ancestral comes in. Ancestral Supplements has a nose-to-tail product line of grass-fed liver, organ meats, living collagen, bone marrow, and more, all in the convenience of a gelatin capsule. For more information or to buy any of their products, go to ancestralsupplements.com. Ancestral Supplements, putting back in what the modern world has left out. This episode is brought to you by Ample. Ample is incredible. It's a meal in a bottle that takes a total of 2 minutes to prepare, consume, and clean up. 2 minutes. I'm not kidding. Now, I know what you're thinking. Anything that quick just has to be made of synthetic ingredients that you'd have a hard time pronouncing and wouldn't want to put into your body. But it's not. Ample is made entirely from natural ingredients and designed to provide an optimal balance between protein, fat, and carbs, as well as all the vitamins and minerals that you'd need in a single meal. There's no question that it's always best to sit down and take your time eating a home-cooked meal from fresh ingredients. But let's face it, oftentimes we just don't have time for that. If you live a busy life like I do and your goal is to get things done, you need quality fuel that you can get into your system quickly. Here's a great example where Ample is perfect for me. When I shoot videos, it takes hours to set up and break down all of my equipment. So I try to get as many videos shot in a day as possible. This prevents wasting a lot of time on setup and helps me conserve big blocks of time outside of shooting videos to get into a flow state where I can research something to my heart's content and spend all the time I need thinking about it creatively and analytically. But if I spend hours dealing with recording equipment plus hours spent preparing food, eating it, and cleaning up, there's no time left over to actually shoot any videos. So on recording days, I use Ample to maximize efficiency and focus on getting things done. Ample comes in 3 versions: original, keto, and vegan. And each version comes in 2 portion sizes, 400 calorie and 600 calorie. The 600 calorie original version gives me 37 grams of protein from a mix of grass-fed whey and collagen, which promotes satiety and flips my brain on. Its fat comes from coconut oil and macadamia nut oil. I like these oils because they're low in polyunsaturated fatty acids, or PUFAs, oils that promote aging and are usually loaded into the processed foods that most people eat when they need something on the go. The coconut oil provides some medium-chain fats to keep my energy levels up, too. The carbs, the vitamins, and the minerals all come exclusively from food sources like sweet potatoes, bananas, cocoa powder, wheat and barley grass, and chlorella. It's full of natural prebiotic fibers and probiotics to promote a healthy microbiome, and the gentle sweetness comes from a mix of honey, monk fruit, and stevia. I just mix it with water, drink it, rinse out the bottle, and boom, 2 minutes in, and I'm fully fueled and ready to face the next phase of the day. I first came across Ample when I met its founder and CEO, Connor Young, at PaleoFX a few years ago. Connor inspired me with his vision for Ample, which I anticipate will be much more than a meal in a bottle in the near future. I've become an official advisor to Ample, and I'll be helping Ample design scientific research that will lead both to an ever-improving Ample and I hope meaningful contributions to our understanding of how to use nutrition to help people be healthier and happier and perform better at the challenges that they care most about. As a listener to the Mastering Nutrition podcast, I've also worked out a special deal for you. If you use the discount code CHRIS15, you'll get 15% off your first order of Ample. To get your discount, go to amplemeal.com. That's amplemeal.com, 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 and use the code CHRIS15 at checkout.
That's it, everybody. Thank you so much for sticking around, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you would like to participate in the next AMA, sign up for the CMJ Masterpass at chrismasterjohnphd.com/masterpass/mastering nutrition. Using that URL or the clickable link in the description of this episode will earn you a lifetime 10% discount off the program. CMJ Masterpass is not just giving you access to participate in one of these AMAs at least once a month, often more than that, but it's also giving you all my content as it is produced instead of waiting until it's released to the public. That means that you're getting my audio video content often weeks ahead of time, sometimes even months ahead of time. And on top of that, you get it ad-free, and on top of that, you get transcripts. Transcripts are especially helpful because maybe you prefer to read it than watch or listen, but even if you prefer to watch or listen, often you can watch or listen while you're doing other activities that don't require the full attention of your brain, and then you can scan for what you really want to study later. Then when you have a transcript, you can keyword search and find exactly what you had exactly whatever you decided that you wanted to look at in more depth later. You can keyword search, find it almost instantaneously, and then study it in whatever way would help you learn it best. The Masterpass gives you crazy benefits across all my audio video content, and for the price of $120 a year or $15 a month, that you can cut down by 10% by using the URL that I just gave you or the clickable link in the description of this episode. Whether you sign up or not, you can find more of me at chrismasterjohnphd.com and at chrismasterjohn on all my social media channels: YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. That's all I have for you today, and I will see you in the next episode.